Well, Linda, we are here at the Ufungamano House, and any moment from now, a forum bring together several anti-corruption crusaders will be taking place, and where several issues revolving around efforts to curb corruption will be discussed. And from that forum, again, we will just try to understand where Kenya stands insofar as fight against corruption is concerned. And so with me here is Mr. Samuel Kimeu. Remember, Samuel Kimeu has been a prominent anti-corruption crusader in the country. And so we want to engage him and at least give us exactly what today is all about and what they intend to do. Karibu sana Bwana Kimeu on KTN News. So what is this day all about?
Well, today, the 11th of July 2018 was ordained by the African Union as the African Day Against Corruption. And from this day, from this year going forward, this day will be observed as a day of bringing together Africans to rededicate themselves to the fight against corruption, even as they take stock of the progress and the challenges that lie ahead. So this is the first day. It falls within a year, the African Year Against Corruption, which is 2018. That's the theme of the AU this year. And basically the theme for this day is winning the fight against corruption, a sustainable path to Africa's transformation. So it is an important day for us. We do not have any illusions about the state of corruption in our continent, but we recognize the efforts that have been put in place, including the setting aside of a year with a theme on corruption, as well as a day that seeks to refocus our attention on the fight against corruption. So today is basically the first of that kind celebration. It's going to be observed the whole of Africa. And for us in Kenya, we decided to organize this public event to take stock and exchange views on how corruption affects us, the cost of corruption in our lives, as well as how we can succeed in fighting it.
So from your perspective, where does Kenya stand in terms of fight against corruption, and what are the glaring effects of the same against the economy and even the progress of the nation?
Well, the impact of corruption is there for all to see. Sometimes it is nuanced, sometimes it's very direct. The right direct ones are where you have projects that are basically non-existent, even though money has been spent. And we have quite a few costing billions in the history of this country. You also see it in projects that are substandard, that do not meet the quality that was expected, and are overpriced. There's also the direct theft, where money just disappears from public coffers into people's pockets or is siphoned outside this country. Then you, of course, have the other nuanced impact, like, sometimes accidents on the road because the quality of the roads have been compromised, or the law enforcement officers have been compromised. The troughs you see on the road, basically because we have, overloaded trucks riding on our roads, or the poor quality roads that cannot stand the weight of the trucks that are on the road. So you see it in every way. But there are also other ways that are so indirect, that when corruption takes away resources, it tends to take away resources from the poor. For the money that is lost, if we get into austerity measures, the people who suffer are the poor who rely on public services like education, health, and so on and so forth. By the time we get to our leaders and the political elite, they will still drive their big cars that are guzzlers. They will still have their security. They will still have, their big medical covers that take care of them. They'll have all the trappings of the positions that they hold. But the poor are the ones who have to receive the bashing every time. Every time we have budget deficits that are ever increasing and the cost of living is increasing, it is the poor who bear that burden when they go to buy bread and they find that more taxes have been added, or they are the working class who have to pay more taxes, dig deeper into their pockets to pay taxes to meet the deficit. While at the same time, the questions about where all the resources that are stolen from government go is not fully answered. In terms of where we are in the fight against corruption, Kenya has been doing fairly badly. If you look at the index that we develop every year, the CPI, the Corruption Perception Index, which is, I must say, a perception index, and I need to underscore that, our position has been fairly consistent, between 139 to 146. Last year, we were ranked 143 out of the countries that were polled in the world. What this means is that we have a deep problem with our accountability measures for fight against corruption. The president has more recently reignited the fight against corruption, and there has been a lot of, dramatics. I would say there's been a lot of drama around this fight. But ultimately, whether it succeeds or not will depend on whether it is able to deliver punishment for those who engage in corruption, whether it is able to deliver recovery of assets and resources that have been stolen. And if we do that, we will then find that Kenyans will support the fight against corruption because it means almost everything to them. If we don't succeed in the fight against corruption, and I think this time round, it's going to be ever more difficult for us to turn the tide against corruption.
Recently, we have seen members of the clergy suggesting that Parliament should come up with a special law issuing amnesty to those accused of corruption to return their looted money and wealth, at least to give them that period to ensure that they return the money. As anti-corruption crusaders, do you support the move, or what would that have on the effort to fight corruption?
Well, I would say that amnesty has its place in the fight against corruption, but that has to be interrogated very thoroughly before we can accept it, lest we end up sanitizing people who have stolen from us. It is not enough for people to come and say sorry and get away with it. But amnesty provisions have been used before in this country. There were some guidelines that were developed about 10 years ago, I would say. And the only beneficiary of those amnesty guidelines that I do recall was a former minister in both the Moi government, who had taken out a house that belonged to the county council and had to return it and pay rent for the period that he had occupied it, and was allowed to get away with that. The problem with amnesty is it must depend on full disclosure of what someone has stolen. And for there to be full disclosure, there has to be an impetus for that. And the impetus for that is a realistic chance that one is going to be apprehended, and sanctioned. If there is no fear that sanctions are going to issue, then there is not going to be any incentive for anyone to come forward and take advantage of any amnesty provisions that are given. And secondly, we need to make sure that we have the capacity to interrogate what has been, declared and returned, to ascertain whether that is the full extent of the theft or not. In our case, I think there are deep questions that need to be interrogated with regard to amnesty.
Well, deep questions indeed. Linda, those are some of the expressions you are getting, and we are here for the better part of this function. And we
Shadrach, hold on. Shadrach, can you hear me?
This event, so that at least we... Yes, Linda, I can hear you.
Listen, so your guest says that
yes, Linda,
Kenya...
I can hear you.
Okay, so your guest says that Kenya has been doing badly in the fight against corruption. He has been involved in this fight for quite some time in different capacities. From where he sits, what is this one big challenge facing the fight against corruption in Kenya?
Well, thank you, Linda. Let me just engage Emma and Mr. Kimeu. Could you just explain to us what is the biggest challenge that Kenya is facing, at least in the fight against corruption? Because from your statement, Kenya is ranking poorly. And so what makes it rank that poorly?
Well, I'll cut through the chase and say our biggest problem is our politics. Our politics have, for the longest time ever, driven corruption. And there is a deep symbiotic relationship between our politics and corruption. What that means is that when leaders are pursuing, political power, a lot of them do so by using resources that are illicitly acquired, or by getting support from shadowy, characters who want to, loot the state. And they invest in the political enterprises of our leaders in the hope that they can reap the benefits after. And that's where you've seen that the biggest challenge we are having today revolves around procurement. It is not by coincidence. It is because that is the largest, loophole through which our resources are stolen. And I will tell you that they are stolen under the protection of our political leadership at various levels. Our institutions are usually blamed. The Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, the Directorate of Criminal Investigations, the judiciary and others. But I will tell you, our institutions would perform impeccably well if our politics were right.
So would one be right to suggest that the Kenyan populace glorifies corruption through their leaders?
Well, I would actually say no. I mean, many Kenyans abhor corruption, but they have come to become cynical about our seriousness in fighting it. And many have given up and have reached a level where they feel this cannot be fought, especially because they see their leaders who are supposed to be, the inspiration for their children, being the ones at the center of all this. So some have given up, some have postponed their ambitions to changing things, and yet others still remain very engaged. So on the other hand, I know we have a deep problem, a societal problem with issues of integrity, and I would say that has been cemented over the years because the lack of accountability at the highest levels of the state have made it, they have confused our young people. They have confused the values of our young people. So when we tell them that it is wrong to steal, and they see our leaders stealing, then they are likely to lean towards the leadership because what the leadership is doing. Because think about it, our children do not learn primarily from what we tell them. They learn mostly by observing what we do. And they see all this money being stolen every day. The Auditor General's reports documenting wanton theft of funds over the years. The tenure and the tone of our audit reports has not changed for the last 20 years. There has been no serious attempt to hold people to account.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kimeu. Well, Linda.
Hold on, Shadrach, I still need your guest. I still need your guest. He says Kenya is doing badly. Of late, we've seen the DPP issue several orders. We've even seen a governor spending 2 nights in police cells. And we have the president talking about lifestyle audit of public officers. Doesn't this give him any sort of hope in terms of in the fight against corruption? Is Kenya maybe now on the right path to in the fight against corruption?
Well, let me engage him once more on that. Mr. Kimeu, we've seen in the recent past, even as we focus back on the issue of Kenya ranking poorly in corruption and the efforts, we have seen the Director of Public Prosecution issuing, seeming to move fast and even make several leaders, including governors, spend nights in cells. And even the president himself seems to be really moving fast, at least to ensure that all is working well toward the efforts of arresting the issue of graft. Does that one paint any positive picture towards fighting corruption in the country?
Indeed, it does. And it is something to be lauded and encouraged. And I want to say that Kenyans will support any well-thought-out and sustained fight against corruption that yields results. And I think I want to underline yields results because it's not the first time prosecutions are being done. Yet we are seeing a new measure of seriousness with the way this is being done. And we hope it can be sustained. But ultimately, we can only applaud it when we see people in jail, not in cells. I mean, people have spent time in cells, and we know even innocent people have spent time in cells for other things, for political reasons, and so on and so forth. So I think the measure of success is not people spending time in cells. It's not the drama with which we arrest or prosecute people. It is the objectivity and the seriousness with which we enforce the law. And I would like to underline what the results will look like. The results will look like people spending time in jail, whatever they have stolen being reverted to the state. Those two will, in my view, and of course fines, because jail terms can sometimes come with fines. So those three, in my view, will begin to indicate that we could actually be laying the foundation for a proper fight against corruption. Because I hold the view that prosecution is important in fighting corruption, but in and of itself is not going to deliver us where we need to go. What we need to do is to make sure that our law enforcement system is right and it's working, so that then the corruption prevention exercise, that is perhaps the most important one, can take place without the cynicism that accompanies it today.
Thank you very much. Well, Linda, so many things to look at, and we believe we shall continue having more time so that Mr. Kimeu and other crusaders will continue engaging us and giving us even more insights in the fight against corruption in the country. But up to that level, I hand it back to you.
Shadrach, thank you, a guest for me. Thank you for that. Shadrach Miti keeping an eye on the corruption.